Welcome to U.S. Sphere, the hottest updates on the conflict between Iran and the U.S. Israel alliance, a war that still shows no sign of ending. On March 21, 2026, together with sharp analysis and commentary on the Outward Insight channel. Ladies and gentlemen, the Middle East earthquake has officially crossed the breaking point. And what is appearing on screen right now is no longer an imaginary scenario. It is the moment when a military legend is stripped bare in a sea of fire. Forget the supposedly invulnerable shield of the Iron Dome and set aside the polished warnings coming out of the White House, because over the past days, the world has held its breath watching a script that no one had written in advance. Israel and the steel fortress of the West are slipping deep into hell. As for the first time, Iran's monsters carrying warheads weighing 3 tons emerge from underground bunkers, tear through the night, and hammer thunderous strikes into the vital core of Tel Aviv. Donald Trump once declared that he would end the war in just 3 days. But the brutal reality is striking Washington in the face. The Blitzkrieg plan has shattered. America is not only bogged down, but also facing the risk of losing the supreme source of power that helped it dominate the world for decades, the petrodollar. Meanwhile, in the East, Russia and China quietly sharpen their blades, waiting for the right moment to push this decaying unipolar order into the abyss. Does Israel still have enough ammunition to survive the coming days, now that the Iron Dome is exhausted? What strategic message do Iran's 3-ton warheads actually carry beyond their destructive power? And, most importantly, why does the tremor in the petrodollar system created by this war open a golden opportunity for Russia and China to officially overtake the United States on the global geopolitical chessboard? All of these suffocating knots will be unraveled by Outward Insight right now. Before we dive into the detailed analysis, please like and subscribe to the channel so you do not miss any important videos about global economic shifts. And do not forget to leave a comment in support of the Iranian fighters on what this narrative describes as their righteous and glorious campaign. Thank you very much for your support. The Iron Dome collapses, Iran unleashes destruction, and Israel's vital nerve center is shattered. Day 18 of the war has become a milestone that forces every Western military textbook to be rewritten from the ground up. This is no longer an ordinary exchange of firepower. It is a war of attrition calculated by Throne, with cold patience and precision down to every beat. The skies over Israel no longer flash with the proud streaks of interceptor missiles. Instead, shockwaves now erupt on the ground, driving straight into military bases and crucial logistics hubs. The naked truth has now been exposed before the whole world. The legendary Iron Dome, once praised as untouchable, has completely collapsed for one simple but devastating reason: ammunition depletion. The figures from the battlefield show a level of ferocity far beyond initial forecasts. For more than 2 weeks, Iran has implemented a low-cost versus high-cost strategy using quantity to crush technological advantage. Thousands of cheap suicide drones, together with older generation cruise missiles, have been launched continuously, creating dense waves of firepower that forced the other side to respond with expensive interceptor missiles. Israel, with absolute faith in technology, poured everything into firing interceptor missiles worth hundreds of thousands of dollars to shoot down targets worth only a fraction of that amount. That was a systemic, strategic mistake. And the price to be paid is not merely financial. It is the erosion of the entire national defense capacity. The result is now plain to see. Strategic stockpiles have been worn down to the bottom, and air defense batteries have become nothing more than motionless steel frames. Systems once viewed as the ultimate shield have now become symbols of helplessness. This is precisely the moment Throne had patiently waited for through years of preparation. A point in time calculated with precision, when the opponent had consumed nearly all of its interception capacity on decoy targets. When Israeli and allied defense systems were overwhelmed by waves of false signals, Iran moved into the decisive phase with absolute coldness. The true main weapons were brought out from hardened underground bunkers, no longer cheap drones but long-range ballistic missiles, carrying warheads weighing several tons, enough to erase large military compounds and destroy deeply buried underground structures. This was a highly strategic move, exploiting the enemy's weakness to the fullest. After drawing its opponent into a nutritional trap, Iran sacrificed older systems like opening pawns in order to force Israel to spend its precious resources, thereby opening the door for the decisive blow. When those heavy warheads began to descend through skies no longer protected, the battlefield balance changed instantly. The image of an exhausted opponent after throwing every punch, now forced to face an unavoidable counterstrike, has become a merciless reality. The collapse of the Iron Dome is not just a technical failure, it is the bankruptcy of a style of warfare overly dependent on technology and money. Reality has proven that strategic endurance, control of tempo, and tactical thinking are what truly decide wars. Israel has fallen into a passive position, not because it lacked weapons, but because it was trapped in a nearly perfect, prearranged snare. When the first warheads hit their targets, they did not merely destroy infrastructure. They also shook society's faith in a defense system that had been elevated almost to sacred status. Emergency resupply efforts from abroad cannot solve the problem immediately, because producing complex interceptor missiles takes time and requires a stable supply chain. Meanwhile, Iran has maintained its attack tempo and still appears to hold back significant capacities not yet used. The impact spreading from the battlefield into the homeland has made cities more vulnerable, warning systems more paralyzed, and response capability steadily weaker. This situation pushes Washington into an extremely difficult choice: intervene directly or accept losing the initiative in the Middle East. The game has changed completely. Iran is no longer in a defensive posture, but is controlling the rhythm of the war according to its own will. The successive strikes have turned many airbases into fields of wreckage. Runways have been torn apart, and advanced military assets have been neutralized inside their shelters before they could even be deployed. This is a chain reaction of systemic collapse, creating one of the greatest military shocks in the modern history of the region. From the position of battlefield coordinator, Iran is showing a highly capacity for tactical adaptation, turning the enemy's greatest strengths into fatal weaknesses. The attrition strategy, combined with a decisive strike, has elevated Tehran to a new level of military and political stature. Each time a missile leaves its launcher, the entire world watches in extreme tension because interception capacity has been seriously degraded. By the end of day 18, the balance had clearly changed. Pressure has mounted across Israel's entire defense system, and America's role in the region is now under a major question mark. What is happening now may only be the beginning of a broader chain of upheavals. The Iron Dome has cracked, the balance has tilted, and Iran is entering the next phase with complete initiative across the entire battlefield, opening a new and deeply volatile chapter in this modern confrontation. The 3-ton monster emerges from its bunker, and Iran delivers a devastating blow to Tel Aviv. If the first 17 days were a carefully calculated prelude by Thrawn to drain the enemy's strength, then on day 18, the hidden trump card was finally revealed, shocking the entire world. When the skies over Israel no longer show the white trails of interceptor missiles, when the Iron Dome has become nothing more than frozen steel, that is when the real monsters emerge from underground. These are strategic missiles carrying warheads weighing up to 3 tons, a figure enough to make even the most fortified defense systems tremble. These are not ordinary warheads designed to destroy a single target. They are eraser machines, built to alter the battlefield through absolute firepower. The spectacle of gigantic steel masses weighing dozens of tons, ripping through the upper atmosphere and descending like deadly meteors, has become the most tangible nightmare the people of Israel have ever faced. Try to imagine the destructive force of a 3-ton warhead. It does not merely create an explosion, it causes a geological shock at the very point of impact. Each missile striking the ground creates a death crater dozens of meters deep, flattening everything within a radius of miles. Military complexes once advertised as untouchable. Underground shelters built to survive even the worst imaginable scenarios now crack under the terrible pressure of Thrawn's crushing blows. This strike carries a hard and unmistakable message, projecting overwhelming dominance. The opponent is running out of ammunition, and now is the moment the hidden force decides the fate of the war. Tel Aviv and Israel's key defense industrial centers are sinking into a sea of fire. Thick, black columns of smoke rise thousands of meters into the sky, blocking out sunlight and turning modern cities into wastelands of battle. There are no longer warning sirens, no longer the spectacle of interceptions in the air. Instead, there is only the shriek of death and earth-shattering detonations announcing the collapse of a system once regarded as unbeatable. What is terrifying lies not only in the explosive force, but also in the tactical use of cluster and penetration warheads. Iran appears to have calculated with great precision. The first missiles carried penetrating warheads to break through reinforced concrete overhead. The follow-up waves then carried thermobaric warheads to wipe out the life within underground shelters. This is no longer conventional warfare. It is a purge conducted through military technology. Israel's fighter fleets, worth hundreds of millions of dollars, and once the pride of Western air power, now lie motionless inside collapsed shelters, reduced to heaps of scrap before they could even take off for a counterattack. This brutality has pushed Israel's military command into a state of extreme panic. They are realizing that every defense scenario built over decades has been shattered by a new reality in which firepower combined with attritional strategy creates absolute superiority. Iran's 3-ton warheads continue to fly in like grim reapers, encountering virtually no resistance. This is a blow not just to Israel, but to the entire intellectual foundation of Western military thinking. Israel is paying in blood and fire for its arrogance, for its overconfidence in technological shields and Washington's backing, while forgetting a basic truth of war. When a determined adversary commits fully, the cost can become existential. Look at the frightening silence from U.S. military bases in the region. They are watching their ally being battered without daring to intervene directly. The reason is obvious. Any escalation could redirect those 3-ton warheads toward U.S. aircraft carriers and bases in places such as Qatar or the United Arab Emirates. Iran has effectively established a de facto denial zone through sheer firepower, demonstrating that it no longer fears any alliance. Every explosion in Israel now serves as a cold warning to Washington. The era of imposing absolute power in the Middle East is slowly drawing to a close. In the blazing inferno over Tel Aviv, the helplessness of an outdated military system is becoming unmistakably clear. Those 3-ton warheads are not only destroying military bases, they are shattering the image of invincibility Israel spent years constructing. Now every inch of land can become a target. Every underground shelter can become a mass grave. Iran is controlling the rhythm of the battlefield at its own pace, neither rushed nor reckless, calmly selecting targets and delivering decisive blows. This is the costly lesson of modern war. Dependence on a shield without the capacity to adapt leads inevitably to defeat. Those 3-ton warheads have become a symbol of the rise of a power that refuses to bend, a force ready to redefine the game through its own strength and will. The reality now suggests that Israel is being driven into a position with no way back. The sea of fire continues to spread, and with each passing second, the West's dread of Iranian power grows deeper. According to this narrative, the war will not end through paper agreements, but will be decided by the brutal facts of the battlefield, where the side that is stronger, more enduring, and more cunning will write the final outcome. Trump's plan collapses, the dance of entrapment, and the bitter end for a superpower. If the previous sections exposed an Israel writhing in flames and an iron dome turned into scrap metal, then this section pulls back the curtain on the bitter failure of the mind, directing events from Washington. The plan for a quick victory using overwhelming power to impose Donald Trump's order has officially been thrown into the garbage heap of history. What is happening in the Middle East is no longer a military excursion. It has become a vast swamp, a black hole swallowing America's strength and credibility, turning the title of Great Negotiator into a joke on the global geopolitical chessboard. The essence of Trump's plan was simple. Use overwhelming air power combined with suffocating sanctions to force Iran into submission within a single week. Washington believed that with carrier strike groups and stealth fighter fleets, it could decapitate Tehran's leadership and force the country into signing an unconditional surrender. But the reality of Day 18 delivered a fiery slap to that confidence. Iran did not submit. Instead, it calmly deployed a long war strategy and combined it with thunderous counterattacks, reducing Pentagon calculations to meaningless fragments. America is now falling into the very nightmare scenario it always tried to avoid. Trump once wanted to withdraw troops to fulfill the promise of America first and to end distant wars. But now he appears chained to a conflict in which every passing day costs the United States billions of dollars, thousands of tons of military equipment, and an endless pit named Israel. Sending troops in may be easy. Withdrawing with honor is the impossible equation. Each time Washington thinks about getting out, another crushing blow forces America to stay longer in order to keep an ally on life support. This is the perfect strategic dilemma. Tehran appears to have engineered with cold precision. The collapse of Trump's plan also lies in Washington's underestimation of Iran's willpower and defensive depth. They thought bombing alone could end the fight, But they forgot that Iran is a regional power with an indigenous defense industry and difficult terrain where every air power advantage is steadily worn down. When the three-ton monsters finally began to speak, they did not only devastate Tel Aviv, they also tore apart the optimistic assessments U.S. generals had submitted. The belief that America could control the rhythm of the war has evaporated, as even U.S. bases in places like Qatar or Bahrain now live in a state of extreme tension under the threat of attack at any moment. Cracks within the Western camp are becoming increasingly visible as European allies begin looking for ways to step back and avoid being dragged into the spiral of destruction. Trump appears increasingly isolated on the very chessboard he helped create. Threats from Washington now sound hollow when reality shows that the United States does not dare commit ground forces into Iran. A war without boots on the ground is a war that cannot be concluded decisively, and that prolonged entrapment is precisely the road towards superpower exhaustion. Trump is trapped between pressure from interest groups demanding that Israel be saved and the anger of American voters faced with promises that have not materialized. At the same time, the conflict exposes a fatal weakness in the U.S. military, its ability to sustain logistics in a prolonged, high-intensity war. As Israel's stockpiles run dry, the United States is forced to draw from global reserves to make up the difference, thereby weakening itself in other theaters. Iran has turned the war into a machine for consuming American resources at tremendous speed. The more Washington wants a quick victory, the longer throne drags things out, steadily squeezing the financial and military strength of its opponent. Rarely has the position of a U.S. president been shaken so violently by a Middle Eastern nation. Every tool from nuclear deterrence to cyber attack is described here as having been used, and yet Iran still stands like a steel fortress. The collapse of Trump's plan in this telling is proof that the era in which America could impose its will through force is drawing to an end. The Middle East is no longer Washington's playground. It has become the burial ground of an old order's ambitions. The cost of this entrapment is not just money or equipment, but the collapse of global confidence. The world is watching America's inability to shield its closest ally from Iranian firepower and drawing its own conclusions. A superpower that cannot protect its nearest partner cannot sustain global order. This is the starting point of a chain collapse that may spread even further. Trump may still be searching for an honorable exit, but Throne appears to have no intention of offering him one. The war has become a test of will, where the more patient side wins, and at this moment, with precise strikes and a posture as firm as bedrock, Iran is portrayed as the side holding the initiative. At the end of this analysis, the picture for Washington looks extremely dark. America has fallen into a strategic trap. Israel is gasping for survival, and Trump faces one of the gravest military failures of his career. The Middle Eastern swamp is widening to swallow what remains of an empire that once considered itself untouchable. Iran locks down Hormuz, and the petrodollar foundations of the American empire begin to tremble. If Iran's three-ton warheads are a direct blow to the body of Israel, then the move to choke the Strait of Hormuz is the lethal dagger thrust straight into the soul of the American empire, the petrodollar. On day 18, the world was not only stunned by the inferno over Tel Aviv, it was also shaken by a colder reality. The throat of global energy now lies in Thrawn's hands. This is no longer a warning delivered at the negotiating table. It is a death sentence being carried out against the monetary privilege Washington has maintained for more than half a century. Look at the sophistication of Iran's move. It does not need to sink every ship passing through the strait. It simply declares Hormuz open to all except the United States, Israel, and their allies. A brief message, but one with destructive force greater than bombs. By doing so, Iran polarizes the world at the gateway of one of the most critical maritime choke points. Ships flying Chinese, Russian, or neutral flags continue to pass under the watch of Iran's naval forces, while Western tankers remain stranded outside, fearing short-of-sea firepower. This split is a direct blow to the so-called freedom of navigation once championed by America. Why is this a death sentence for the petrodollar? One must look straight at the core of dollar power. Every drop of oil in the world has traditionally been traded in US dollars. That was the foundation of American strength. But when Iran locks Hormuz against Washington and simultaneously encourages partners to use other currencies, such as the renminbi or alternative payment mechanisms outside the Western system, that pillar begins to crack. Oil prices surge past $100 and move even higher amid market panic. America can print more money, but it cannot print more energy. nor can it use the dollar to force Iran to reopen Hormuz when its military power itself is being challenged. Tehran's move pushes Washington toward a highly risky economic scenario in which the energy lifeline is constricted, while transportation and production costs worldwide soar. The US dollar begins to lose standing in the eyes of Middle Eastern states. Oil-exporting nations that once depended on America quietly begin to shift their capital flows. They recognize that the security umbrella promised by Washington cannot protect them against actual attacks. The weakening of the petrodollar does not happen with a dramatic explosion, but with a terrifying silence across trading floors, as the dollar is gradually replaced by new payment systems. The subtle brilliance of Iran's strategy lies in the fact that it is not using military power alone. It is also wielding the rules of geopolitics to isolate America. By allowing ships from other nations to pass, Washington is prevented from forming a unified coalition against Tehran. The major economies of Asia and Europe need energy to survive. They may be willing to adapt to new payment mechanisms rather than be dragged into a confrontation that brings them no benefit. America falls into a bitter paradox. The more it increases its military presence to escort oil tankers, the more it escalates the situation and drives energy prices higher, thereby putting pressure on its own economy. Reality at the energy flashpoints paints an even harsher picture. Although America claims to have inflicted severe damage on Iran's oil infrastructure, energy flows continue through flexible transport routes and strategic partner networks. By contrast, oil facilities belonging to close U.S. allies run into difficulty exporting when routes are brought under pressure. Iran has turned the entire region into a battle space where it holds the initiative, while America and Israel are forced into reactive positions. The weakening of the petrodollar carries the risk of global financial shock. When a currency is no longer tightly tied to energy, its value comes under deeper scrutiny. Washington faces a dual pressure: losses on the battlefield and the risk of financial instability at home. This is portrayed as the price of underestimating a country with strategic depth and enduring will like Iran. By the end of Day 18, the Strait of Hormuz was no longer merely a transit route. It had become a symbol of a changing order. Every non-Western vessel passing through becomes one more sign that the old order is being replaced. Iran is implementing a strategy in which victory lies not only on the battlefield, but in controlling the life source of its opponent. A new order is taking shape, one in which thrones, voice, and influence reach beyond the region and produce a profound shift in the global balance of power. Russia and China stand to benefit from the ruins of the unipolar order. While America struggles in the Middle Eastern swamp, and Israel writhes under the storm of 3-ton warheads, in another corner of the geopolitical chessboard, two major powers, Russia and China, are watching with cold calculation. This is a moment when the composure of great powers becomes clear. They do not need to fire shots or show off their strength. Moscow and Beijing are already collecting enormous economic and geopolitical gains from the errors of the US-Israel alliance. First comes Russia. President Putin is entering one of the most favorable periods since the conflict in Ukraine began. The deeper America sinks into Iran, the more pressure on the Ukrainian battlefield eases. Washington's attention, financial resources, and above all, weapons stockpiles are being pulled toward the Middle East. As the United States pours interceptor missiles into sustaining a weakening Israel, Ukraine drifts further outside the priority zone. Russia uses this window to consolidate its position and increase pressure along multiple fronts. But Moscow's greatest benefit lies in energy revenues. As Hormuz tightens and global oil prices rise above $100, Russia becomes a direct beneficiary. Oil money flows into Moscow at high speed, weakening the effect of Western sanctions imposed over years. Some countries that once aligned with America may even be pushed toward Russian supply in order to stabilize their energy demand. Russia not only increases revenue, but also strengthens its position as a global energy pillar, holding a key capable of influencing many economies. Then comes China, which is carrying out a strategy of observation and opportunism with great discipline. While the United States consumes resources in military confrontation, Beijing quietly expands its influence through trade and finance. Iran's move around Hormuz creates a special advantage for China. When Tehran announces that the maritime route remains open for non-hostile partners, Chinese oil tankers continue operating under Iranian oversight. This is presented not as coincidence, but as the result of strategic coordination among Iran, Russia, and China in reshaping the global financial order. Beijing seizes the opportunity to promote the renminbi in energy transactions. As the petrodollar weakens, China emerges as an alternative partner with more flexible payment mechanisms. Middle Eastern countries, having witnessed the limits of American military power, begin adjusting their strategy, reducing dependence on Washington and broadening cooperation with new partners. China does not need to use force to steadily increase its influence. It becomes an economic center and a more stable partner in the region. The coordination among Russia, China, and Iran appears to be forming a new strategic axis, visible in their cooperation on technology, economics, and mutual support in security matters. This means the global balance of power is shifting more clearly than before. The battlefield developments do not merely reflect Iran's strength, they also reveal deep ripple effects across the geopolitical system. America is gradually becoming isolated, even within its own alliance structure, as partners begin to reassess their strategic interests. Europe, heavily dependent on energy, is forced to rethink its relationships with Russia and China under these new conditions. This fracturing creates major advantages for rising powers. The unipolar order, once led by the United States, is weakening rapidly, and a multipolar structure is taking shape in which Moscow and Beijing play increasingly important roles in directing global energy and finance. While America and Israel focus on immediate military targets, Russia and China pursue a long-term strategy aimed at rebalancing power. They remain in the observer's role, but stand ready to exploit every opportunity to expand their gains. The Middle East conflict therefore ceases to be merely a regional confrontation. It becomes a force helping reshape world order in the 21st century. And in that context, countries capable of patience, strategic calculation, and timing like Russia and China in this narrative appear to be gaining the upper hand on the global chessboard. A death sentence for the American unipolar empire. The old order crushed beneath the 3-ton warheads. We are standing at a historical turning point where each explosion from Iran's 3-ton warheads over Israeli skies does not merely destroy visible military targets, but rings out like a funeral bell for the entire unipolar structure America built after the Cold War. At this moment, a picture is emerging of the clinical death of an aging international system, one in which Washington's rules no longer hold against battlefield power and the cold strategic logic of the resistance axis. This is the moment that exposes most clearly the decline of a superpower clinging to the glory of the past in order to withstand a brutal present. The truth, according to this narrative, is now exposed. International institutions from the United Nations to military alliances such as NATO are watching in a state of helplessness. As Israel absorbs the attacks, Washington has used every diplomatic instrument to isolate Iran, but with almost no result. The reason is clear in this telling. The world has seen the contradictions and limits of American power. A superpower that cannot protect its closest ally from strategic strikes cannot force other nations into obedience. The collapse of the unipolar order is not occurring on paper. It is happening directly on the battlefield of Day 18, where America's military prestige is challenged by Iran's resilience and combat capability. Look at the movement of non-aligned states. Countries that once stood between the major power blocs are now leaning toward Russia, China, and Iran. They understand that betting on a bogged-down Washington is no longer the safest option. The weakening of the petrodollar is only the opening step. More significant is the erosion of security confidence. If America cannot take decisive action to protect Israel, then other allies are compelled to question Washington's level of commitment. A domino effect of distrust is spreading, eroding the foundations of American power from within. Throne's use of 3-ton warheads is presented as a declaration of independent military capability. It proves in this narrative that a heavily sanctioned state can still build enough strength to alter the balance. That creates a strong psychological effect on many countries seeking ways to escape dependency. The unipolar order relied on coercive power and deterrent psychology. But when that fear factor is broken by shockwaves over Tel Aviv, the structure itself begins to dissolve. The world is entering a new phase in which power is no longer concentrated in a single center, but redistributed according to real capacity and self-reliance. The weakening of the old order is also reflected in the reduced effectiveness of economic sanctions. Even under maximum pressure from Washington, Iran continues to maintain production capacity and expand networks of cooperation. While Russia and China establish alternative payment mechanisms and energy flows begin separating from Western financial control, America is pushed into a reactive posture. Its entrapment in the Middle East becomes an opportunity for other powers to shape a more balanced system of rules. In this context, the power balance is clearly changing. America and Israel, once in a proactive position, now face rising pressure. Iran, once under siege, has risen to control the tempo of war in one of the world's most strategic regions. This is presented not as an accident, but as the result of a long-term strategy built on patience and calculation. A new order is forming, in which the voices of Throne, Moscow, and Beijing grow increasingly influential. The three Tunan warheads do not only destroy military targets, they also shake the image of American power as something irreplaceable. When the smoke clears, the world may face a different reality, one in which no single state can impose its will without paying a proportionate price. China rises, Persia pivots the world, and America is pushed away from the center of power. In this final section, China's rise is framed as the ultimate victory on the geopolitical chessboard. While America burns money and credibility on ineffective strikes, and while Israel struggles to patch the fatal cracks in the Iron Dome, China in the East is making quiet moves whose impact is no less significant than Iran's three Tunan warheads. This is the key section for understanding who truly controls the game. When the smoke begins to settle, Beijing does not need to flaunt power. It only needs to move at the right moment to overtake Washington and push it into the position of an outdated power gradually being left behind. Look at how China approaches the Middle East in the middle of the storm. While America sends aircraft carriers to exert pressure, China sends diplomatic delegations and signs major economic agreements with Tehran, Riyadh, and Abu Dhabi. Beijing's strategy is highly pragmatic. It does not choose sides in order to confront. It chooses to build a new ecosystem of economic influence outside America's orbit. Iran's decision to let Chinese ships pass through the Strait of Hormuz while restricting the West is presented as a clear sign of a new order in formation. The message is simple. Stability and development require cooperation with partners that respect sovereignty. The weakening of the petrodollar creates an opportunity for China to promote the renminbi and energy trade. As oil markets become more volatile, Beijing quickly moves to sign long-term agreements with Iran and Gulf states under new payment mechanisms, creating direct pressure on the financial foundations of the United States. Washington may wield military power, but it cannot control the economic choices of nations once confidence in the dollar begins to slip. China steadily expands its influence without using force, broadening its role as an economic partner and a credible mediator in the eyes of many Middle Eastern countries. As America becomes trapped, a power vacuum emerges, and Beijing uses that opening to expand through infrastructure, technology, and long-term strategic projects. From telecommunications networks to navigation systems, Chinese influence spreads further and further, binding the region more closely to its economic initiatives. The coordination between Russia, China, and Iran points toward a new power structure. Russia uses energy and military strength to exert pressure. Iran maintains initiative on the battlefield. China consolidates economic and diplomatic influence. Together, this combination places the United States under pressure from multiple directions. In fact, each move by Washington may be pushing Middle Eastern countries even closer to China. This is described as a long-term strategic failure. A multipolar world is gradually taking shape, and within it, China emerges as a new center of coordination. Beijing does not need direct confrontation. It only needs to exploit the mistakes of its rival in order to rise. As countries in the region begin to regard China as their main economic and perhaps even security partner, America's role declines more visibly. China's advantage does not come from firepower, but from long strategic vision and an ability to seize opportunity. After 18 days of upheaval, from the weakening of Israel's defenses to the force of Iran's strategic strikes to Washington's failed plans, and finally to the global shift in power, everything converges into one broader picture. The unipolar order is drawing to a close, and a new structure is taking shape in which countries like Iran, with strong will and strategic autonomy, have asserted an important role in shaping the outcome. Those who are arrogant will pay the price. Those who are patient and know how to seize the moment will gain the advantage. According to this interpretation, the situation will continue to evolve dramatically in the coming period. And what do you think? What is your view of these developments? Is this truly a turning point that weakens American influence in the Middle East, or just a transitional phase? Share your thoughts in the comments so we can continue the discussion together. And if you found this analysis useful, please share it, like the video, and subscribe to US Sphere to keep following the latest updates. See you again in the next reports with deeper and more reality-based perspectives. Goodbye.